passage about toys and their function, how the role function, how toys have been perceived has changed. Okay, we quickly read the passage and summarize it before we look at the questions. Although the explicit didacticism of modern toys is relatively novel in human history, playthings have always seemed to provide a toehold on the climb towards maturity. Okay, so didactic means intending to teach. So the explicit didacticism of modern times is a new event in human history. Every toy seems to be like educational toy, instructional toy. There's some sort of learning that a child is having through toys. This didacticism is a novel, is a new thing in human history. Playthings have always provided a toehold to the world of maturity. Somewhere they've helped your development. A ram-shaped pull toy from the 3rd millennium BC city of Tel Asmer likely encouraged a Mesopotamian child to practice crawling on the floor and then toddling down the rain. In the Kalahari desert, the child-sized bow and arrow still helps to prepare the San child for his eventual role in the hunt. So it's always had some sort of connection with, the mature world or what you're going to do later. But this explicit teaching part of it may be new. Following the spread of capitalism and the Protestant ethic beginning in the 16th century, play in much of the Western world was frowned upon unless it was construed as a form of physically, mentally, and morally productive work. Now, this change happened in the 16th century in the Western world. When you talked of play, it was frowned upon. It was uh, not something that was regarded very favorably unless that play had a physically, mentally, and morally productive effect. It had some sort of physical, mental, and moral result at the end. It had some aim that would be physically, mentally, and morally productive. Play was not, was frowned upon. It was not looked down upon. Educational toys like the ones that filled my son's playroom emerged more or less directly from that kind of moralizing and industrious zeal. So she's now toys that are there in a child's room are from that philosophy that a toy or play should be morally, mentally, physically, mentally, and morally productive. In the mid 20th century, that zeal gained a dubious neuroscientific rationale. That industrious zeal that everything that has to have a purpose, a child should learn, that had a dubious neuroscientific rationale. So they added a neuroscientific angle to it, and the author calls it dubious because he or she doesn't believe in it. Beginning in the 1960s, researchers studying lab rats, cats, and rhesus macaques found that mammals needed relevant stimulation early in their lives in order to develop crucial faculties such as sight. They also, so you should give them the right kind of stimulation to develop their faculties, and these faculties included sight also. They also discovered that young creatures had a superabundance of synaptic connections that were dramatically pruned back as they developed. So they also had a lot of synaptic connections, something that happens in the nerves, uh, that were became less as they developed. Animals reared in environments where they could interact with toys and other members of their species had more synapses than those raised in isolation. On their own terms, these were groundbreaking insights into what is now known as neuroplasticity. And what is neuroplasticity? The study of how the brain changes over time. But the results were quickly lumped together when they did that experiment on cats and dogs and rhesus monkeys, and not monkeys, macaques, and all that. What did they develop? They looked at these results, found that when these animals grew up in isolation, they were not that good. When they grew up with toys and playthings, they develop better faculties. All these results, they bunched them together, lumped them together, and extrapolated them to human beings in scientifically unfounded ways. They assumed that this will work in human beings also. And they did it without using scientific, proper, established methods. Over the next 30 years, the beliefs took root that we have to stimulate young children's brains through toys, bilingualism, and snatches of intrauterine Bach music in order to ensure those brains are forming and maintaining the maximum number of synapses so that children can reach their fullest potential and avoid lifelong drudgery, misery, even criminality. Therefore, from then the theory has been give them as much stimulus as possible, keep those synapses in the brain active so that they live to their full potential. In the late 1990s, the neuroscience writer and research funder dubbed this the myth of the first 3 years. Right? There was a myth that a child learns the maximum the first 2 or 3 years, therefore, give him as much input. He called it the myth of the first 3 years. That is the passage. Toys, role of toys, an experiment on the neurological impact, then which was extrapolated to human beings without much basis. And later they said that they quoted somebody saying that this is the myth. So there's not probably what has been stated by them is not necessarily true about giving a child educational toys and motivating them so that they reach their potential. The author thinks that they were groundbreaking findings that pioneered the field of neuroscience. If they were, the author wouldn't have written this and wouldn't have quoted the 3 year myth. The author thinks that these were unscientific findings that were mixed together and applied to human beings. The author doesn't call the experiments unscientific, doesn't call the findings unscientific. What he objected to was extrapolating the results, the findings on animals to human beings in unscientific ways. So B is not correct. The author thinks of extrapolation of the findings to human beings as unwarranted. Did he find the extrapolation to human beings unwarranted? Most scientific experiments extrapolated to human beings. His objection is not that they've taken the case of animals and tried to see if it works in a human being. That's called extrapolation, right? That's not his objection. He says they extrapolated it hastily in unscientific ways. That is his problem. So C looks like the right answer but isn't. The author is ambivalent, calling them groundbreaking and unscientific in another. No. Author thinks that the findings were applied to human beings in ways that were not scientifically substantiated or scientifically unsubstantiated. That's the answer.